That brake fluid doesn't look so hot. Hi everyone, and welcome to Drive, your source for automotive reviews, analysis, maintenance, and restorations. Please subscribe to our channel, watch the entire video, watch our other videos, and click on notifications to be first to learn about new videos. I'm Chris Capredoni, and in this how-to video, I will be performing a brake fluid replacement and brake bleed procedure, specifically on a BMW X5. Brake fluid, whether it is .3, 4, 5, or 5.1, all needs to be periodically replaced approximately every 2 years to maintain your brake's efficiency and maximize the service life of your brake hardware. Brake fluid is hygroscopic and will absorb water over time, contaminating your fluid and reducing your brake's performance. Let's get over to the vehicle and get started. Hi everyone, welcome to Drive. It's that time again. Every 2 years I flush the brake fluid from my vehicles so that I can put in new non-contaminated or dirty fluid to keep my brake system operating properly. The problem with brake fluid, and in this vehicle, this BMW takes .4, is that brake fluid is hygroscopic, which means that it absorbs water over time. Now, the problem with that is water has a different boiling point than hydraulic brake fluid. It's much, much lower. So as your brake system heats up, any water in that fluid will start to boil and vaporize, which changes the dynamics of the fluid, meaning that your brakes will feel spongy, they won't perform properly, and in some extreme cases may actually fail. So the general rule of thumb, depending on your climate, is every 2 years. So in this BMW, the reservoir, and in most vehicles, unless you're driving an exotic like a McLaren or Ferrari or a Lamborghini, is typically in this area of the engine bay. So this one had, the BMWs have a plastic cowling, which has 1, 2, 3, 4 plastic 13mm bolts that just turn a quarter turn, and then you just jimmy it out to gain access to this. So I'm going to get set up. What I need to do is do all 4 wheels, starting with the rear, and I need to jack it up and chock it properly. So let's get started. So I'm going to be starting with the 2 rear wheels. Typically what you do when you do a brake fluid flush is you start with the longest brake lines, which in most cases, there are some cases where it's not, are the rear wheels. And the longest one is typically the passenger rear, followed by the driver rear. Then you move to the front, and the next one in line, the third one, is the passenger side front, and then finally the one closest to the reservoir, and again it depends on your vehicle, is the driver front. So I've already lifted it up and secured it. The next step is to open up the reservoir. Okay, the next step in the process is to open up the reservoir because we need to do a little bit of prep work before we start bleeding. So what I've done is I've cleaned the entire exterior of the master cylinder, because the last thing you want to do is introduce dirt and contamination as you're trying to remove dirt and contamination. So I've cleaned it all up. It's nice and dry. It's just a process of unscrewing it and lifting it entirely out. Now, brake fluid is very corrosive, so don't let it touch any rubber hoses, wires, or bodywork paint. So make sure you have a rag nearby so that you can secure it there. Now, since I'm going to bleed the entire system, I need to be able to replace all of the fluid in this reservoir. So in order to do that, it's done in processes. I don't want to drain the entire reservoir all at once, because then I'll be introducing air into the brake lines, and that is a much more complex and difficult process to properly bleed your brake line. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a little technique on what to do in carefully removing small quantities of brake fluid so that you can get this job started. So over the years, I've kind of refined this process to the point where I'm very happy with what I do in order to control the removal of brake fluid. So what I use, I mean, years ago, I used to use pumps, even a turkey baster, like crude things. Then I stumbled upon using a syringe. What a syringe is it's small enough that allows me to go into the top of the reservoir and control the amount of fluid I take out very carefully. I don't want to be scooping or sucking large quantity amounts out like other devices will do. So what I need to do is I need to take some out to bring it down to about a midpoint so that I can start putting in new fluid before I begin my flush at each wheel. So this is the process. Then I just carefully move it to my cup. Okay, so that's about halfway. So what I'm going to do is move to the rear wheel, and well, actually, I'm going to, the next step is to add new fluid so that I can bring it up to the full line again. Okay, the next step is now to introduce clean fluid into the reservoir. And I want to fill it to the max or a little bit more because as I go through the bleeding process, the reservoir will drop and I'll have to keep adding to it. So let me try and get an angle here where everyone can see. Okay, I filled it a little bit too high, but it's still okay. I'm just below the threads. So now I've got enough fluid in the system to allow me to do the first bleeds on the rear wheels, which I'll get going on. Here I am at the rear passenger wheel, which is the first one I'm going to start at. And what you need to do is locate the caliper, and behind the caliper, I've already got it set up, but there's a little bleeder valve there, which I'll show a picture of. And there is a nipple area right at the end of it. That's how you can recognize it. I've hooked up my tube to it. It needs to be a tight fitting tube. And on the part where I can loosen it, I put in already an open box wrench. Before that, there are threads that you can see there. I've already pre-lubricated them with WD-40, or you can use liquid wrench, just to ensure that the threads aren't seized, because these things will snap under the wrong circumstances. So here I am, I'm all set up. The other end of the tube ends in a container with some old brake fluid, because this will prevent any air from being reintroduced in the system from the two-man pumping system that I'm going to demonstrate, which is still the best way to do it, because you need yourself here at the wheel in order to monitor what's going on, air bubbles in the tube, overflowing on the container and all that. It's best to have somebody pump. What they'll do is, as you open up the little bleeder screw to allow the old fluid to come out, you'll have your assistant pump the brake slowly all the way to the floor. And then when you are, I'll demonstrate, when new fluid starts coming out and or there are no more bubbles, that's when you have them hold the brake pedal to the floor as you close the bleeder screw tight, so that no air gets into the system. And that will have to be done on all four wheels, again, starting with the two rear. My system's in the vehicle ready to start pumping. I'm doing a two-man system. So what I need to do is I need to open up the bleeder screw. Then my system will start pumping. And what that'll do is it will force the old fluid out and the new fluid into the system. So let's get started on it. Okay, wait a second. Okay. Now you might not be able to see it on camera, but I can see old fluid being forced out. There aren't many bubbles because I prevented that at the reservoir by not draining it too far. So what's happening here is my system is pumping old fluid out of the caliper. Okay, so, okay, hold. So now it's time for me to close it. Okay, and I'll need to do that at all four wheels. After pumping the first brake, you can see that the reservoir has dropped significantly, which is a good sign because what I'm doing is forcing the old fluid out of the system and it will be replaced by the new system, the new fluid. So what I need to do before I do brake number 2 is I need to top it up again and then do the process again for the other rear wheel. Done with the rear wheels, now I've lifted and secured the vehicle and removed the front wheels. Same procedure as the rears. It's very easy to find the bleeder screw. It's right there, and I already lubricated it and took the protective cap off of it. The one that is a little different is the one on the driver's side, and I'll demonstrate in a second. I am on the front driver's side, and you can see that there's a cable attached to that bleeder screw. What that is, it's the cable for the brake pad wear sensor. So it's very easy to remove it out of the way. All you do is lift the cap off and then just lift the cable out of the way so you can perform your brake bleed, and then you'll just do in reverse. You'll put it back in and cap it again. So that's the only difference with this particular caliper. So we're at the front passenger brake position. I've already set up the drainage tube and I have the open box wrench in the correct position. So this is the same procedure as the rear. I open up the bleeder screw. My assistant pumps the brakes to get the old fluid out, and then I stop when I start seeing a color difference, which means I'll be looking for a lighter color and or all the bubbles have stopped. So I'm watching for those two important cues for me to stop the process on this wheel. So what I'm doing now is I'm going to open it up, start pumping. Okay, so I'm starting to see a color change in the fluid and I'm not seeing any bubbles. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask my assistant to hold the brake pedal down as I close the bleeder screw. Okay, hold it. Are you holding it? Yep. Okay, so now I close it. And that's that for this wheel. This is the final wheel. It's the front driver's, which is the last one you're supposed to be doing. So I have my drainage tube set up, the open box wrench in the right spot. All I need to do is open up the bleeder screw and we bleed this last one. So here, I turn it open. Okay, start pumping. You can see my runoff container. It's slowly filling up, and any bubbles that may be in the system are being purged through the old brake fluid, so no air is getting introduced back into the system, which is very important. Okay, I think I've reached a position now where I've reached the spot where there isn't any old fluid, so I'm going to ask my assistant to hold it down, and then I'll close this. Okay, hold it down. Okay. And then close it off. Okay, so now the next step is to get this off, put the wheels back on, get it back on the ground, and check the level in the master cylinder reservoir and fill it to maximum. All the wheels are back on and the vehicle's down on the ground, stationary and flat. I'm looking at my reservoir. It's been depleted by about 2/3. So I have forced all of the old fluid out. The remaining third at the bottom is the clean fluid that I've been continuously adding. So what I need to do in order to complete the process is fill up the reservoir up to the maximum line, and I'm good for 2 more years. So that's what I'll do. So there's 2/3. Now what I need to do is put the cap back on, put the cowling back in place. And with BMWs, you have to reset the service computer to indicate that you've just purged and removed all of the, you've done a brake fluid purge, so that it knows that in 2 years' time to remind you again that it's time for this service. So I'll get to that. And when I'm ready, I'll show how to reset on the computer. So after we completed the brake fluid change, we need to reset the computer. So the process is to get in the car, close the door, put the key in the slot, don't put your foot on the brake, and push the start button once. Now you go over to the button, hold it in, until you get to that symbol there. Then you press it in again. Reset, then you press it in again and hold. And it's been reset. The way to confirm that you've reset it correctly is you go through the service requirement details until you find brake fluid. And if the symbol for brake fluid is green and it specifies the next service date, which for me is September of 2025, you know you've done it correctly. If you still have a red brake fluid symbol, go through the process again until you get it to green. Here's a sample of the old brake fluid that I removed from the BMW. You can clearly see that it's dirty and contaminated, not just with dirt and deposits, but most likely there's an element of H2O in there. So it clearly needed to be changed, and now the fluid in the system is good for 2 years. Try and stick to that schedule. Going beyond 3, you're asking for potential problems on a number of aspects. Reduced braking capacity, corrosion in your lines from water, because I don't think a lot of the lines are protected from the inside. Some of the newer ones are either a non-rusting alloy or some other material, but a lot of the older ones are metal based and they will corrode. So removing anything that has contamination in it, especially the water part, will be beneficial to the long-term service of your brake system. Thanks for watching. Thanks everyone for watching this informative DIY tutorial on how to replace brake fluid and bleed the entire brake system. Please ensure that you wear eye protection and properly lift and secure the vehicle with jack stands and wheel chocks. Please dispose of old brake fluid environmentally and do not store new brake fluid long-term as it is hygroscopic and will absorb moisture even in a new unused state. Remember to reset your service computer. Also, ensure that you reinstall the wheel lug nuts or bolts to the proper torque. This X5 requires a torque spec of 105 pound-feet. Please remember to subscribe to our channel, like the video, and select the notification option. Drive, your source for automotive reviews, analysis, maintenance, and restorations.